Right, for about the fourth time. Issue the card. So I'm not saying I'm going to rush through this, but nonetheless. We've finished up to the end of the stanza. Obviously the idea there, we said that there's a formality to the punctuation, the terseness of the information that she is given. Okay? We finish off this part of it, the stanza 2, with an ellipsis, with a dot, dot, dot. If you can comment on punctuation, the impact of punctuation on meaning, very, very important, more likely to get the higher grades. And even though the way I've set this out on the board, you'd have these stanzas down below there, we can but imagine what that dot, dot, dot means, and the gap in between those stanzas actually implies. That again, she is sitting there, probably a sleepless night, waiting still. This time with the news of her husband's death, but maybe in the vain hope that the information was wrong. We get the idea of the irony. The irony becomes self-evident. The irony being, of course, that she then receives a second letter. A second letter. 'Tis the morrow. The fog hangs thicker. And we get this idea of pathetic fallacy again, that suddenly the fog is the grief this time, the grief that she is feeling, the weight and claustrophobia. Now she's trapped in a different way, not in a waiting for the inevitable news of her husband's death, but trapped in her widowhood. The postman nears and goes, and again there's a terseness to this and that formality again of that particular punctuation. A letter is brought whose lines disclose by the firelight flicker his hand whom the worm now knows. Now this is quite a common motif. A motif is a repeated idea or a repeated bit of imagery that a poet or a playwright or a writer might use. And even though there's a massive sentimentality, there's real heartfelt grief that the wife feels for her husband's death. And even that we've got this idea, the use of alliteration there, and the firelight flicker, the fragility of life, and the very, very temporary nature of life. There's a real harshness here. A harshness that where the letter that she's received saying he has fallen, as if that is something to do with honour. That sounds quite an honourable way to die. He has fallen while fighting for his country. The reality, just like you get the gritty reality when you look at Dulce et Decorum Est and something like that, the reality in his hand was writing this letter to her, whom the worm now knows. His hand, his flesh, his body, his heart, is now in the ground being eaten by worms. That is the stark reality of it. Not the old lie, as Wilfred Owen might have put it. The reality of war is death. And that is the reality of death, an organic thing being eaten. But what is it that she reads? What is it that she reads now in his letter? Fresh, firm pen. So when he was still fresh, this idea of when he was still alive. And firm, there's a strength in the hand as he's writing. He's a soldier, but there's a strength in that hand. Not just a strength in his body, but a strength in his feelings and his emotions. Penned in highest feather. And the idea of this is full of feeling from him as well, the highest feather. There's feeling that's gone into his writing, very much somebody who is alive. And it clearly contrasts with this idea of what he is now, but worm food. Okay? And what is it that he writes in this letter to her, which she has received after the letter notifying her of his death? Page full of his hope to return. So it's not just one page, but pages full of what he hopes to do when he returns to her. And of home plan jaunts, and there's a playfulness there. There's a youthfulness. Jaunts by break and burn in the countryside. So you can imagine this rather romantic way of him saying to her, when I get back we'll go on walks in the countryside, by little streams and so on. In the summer weather,